Our next speaker is Dana Hicks. Dana is the Wildfire Threat Specialist working for the Prevention Program and the Predictive Service Unit of BC Wildfire Service. Dana is responsible for determining wildfire threat and risk matrices for the province of BC. He also spends time on a wildfire incident management team where he serves as a fire behavior analyst, and he has been actively performing this role for the past 20 years, where he has observed many large wildfire events. Let's get the presenter role transition to Dana now. And thank you for joining us, Dana.
Thank you for the invitation. I've done a lot of chuckling, hearing a lot of the issues and kind of solutions that you're working on that we're kind of dealing with the same things in British Columbia. So for British Columbia, the 2021 wildfire season was another very interesting wildfire season. It was the first deaths that we've had of public probably in the last 40 years. So it was kind of scary in that sense, but it is, in 5 years, this is our third large fire season. So a lot of issues are popping up, and public are starting to get a little antsy with us not coming up with solutions. Just a few facts about British Columbia. It's 95 million hectares. I'll speak metric, but I also speak imperial as well. So it's just under 235 million acres. About 60 million hectares, or 148, is forested. Of that, 90% of that is publicly owned. We have about 96% of the forest inventory is comprised of conifer species, giving us about half of the softwood inventory in Canada. So, lots of large tracts of forest, but there seem to be lots of interface areas starting to pop up in there as well. And again, we have the forest and range, a lot of farming, a lot of watershed protection, habitat issues, lots of the recreational tourism as well. So it's a lot of stress put on the forests of British Columbia. Our challenges in 2021, as everybody else is the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. It really hampered us bringing out of province resources in and moving our own staff around to, amongst different health units within the province as well. In late June, we had a historic heat dome that basically pretty well fried us in terms of temperatures. We set, high temperatures, record high temperatures for Canada were set several days in a row. So, temperatures, in that 100 to 125 Fahrenheit range. And, there was, as you guys were very busy, there was other agencies in Canada that were very busy as well. So we just didn't have that, the ability to reach across the border and welcome other staff in to help us, which we have done in previous years. We had 1,610 wildfires, 868,000 hectares burnt, which equates to just over 2.1 million hectares or acres burnt. 60% were human caused, or 60% were natural caused, so lightning caused, and 35% were human caused. And there's still 5% that are undetermined, but a lot of those undetermined ones will probably fall into the human caused envelope, which is pretty well what we normally have by every fire season. It's usually a 60-40 split. So pretty well averaged in terms of number of lightning fires and the number of human caused fires as well. This year, the fires seem to impact wildland urban interface areas a lot more. We had 181 evacuation orders, 304 evacuation alerts, and we were, we were under a provincial state of emergency for 56 days. That being said, the province has been under a state of emergency due to COVID since COVID began in March of 2020. So a lot of stress when people are under evacuation orders and evacuation alerts, and it tends not to bring out the best in our public as well. We had just about 20,000 calls to our 1-800 center. So they deal with all the wildfire calls, and basically in a 2-month period, 20,000 calls is a pretty high envelope of calls for that group to receive. We have something that we call a wildfire of note. We had 67 wildfires of note. And basically a wildfire of note is a fire that's particularly visible or posing threat to public safety, impacting evacuation routes or impacting communities. So that's a very high number for our province. And you can see basically when you look at the bottom, the 49th, they went from the 49th to almost the 60th parallel and impacted a lot of areas. I live in Prince George, which is kind of almost middle of the province. So, you know, a huge area. Again, you know, the southern interior, this valley here is where the bulk of those were, and that's where the bulk of our wildfires were as well. Very dry climate, you know, to the point of almost just from semi-arid to completely arid areas, you know, very desert-like areas. So huge impact on that ecosystem. We had 284 helicopters on contract over the fire season, and we probably, if we could have got our hands on more, we would have used more. But that was, we were in Canada, as down in the States, we were pretty well tapped out of helicopters, and I think anything that was available, we were taking. Again, we had 51 fixed-wing aircraft, that's tankers and aircraft. We have in the picture here, this is our little 802 amphibious bombers, the Firebosses. We had 2 groups of those on, and fires in some pretty tight terrain areas, those worked very well. As well, we had the 415 skimmer group from Alberta helping us for a while, but the bulk of the aircraft were either Bird Dog or land-based retardant aircraft. We flew 676 air tanker missions. Again, liters take just for the US gallon, divide that by about 3.5, 3.8. So you'll see that we dropped suppressant, that's water, and foam, dropped around probably 8 million gallons of that. And retardant, we dropped about just a little over 5 million gallons of retardant. So I call it the Frank's Red Hot. We put that red stuff on everything. So, you know, we did do quite a few missions and put a lot of retardant on the ground. Out of province support, again, with COVID, it was a lot less that we had seen in previous years. We had 917 out of province personnel. We had our Parks Canada, our national park system. We had teams and staff from that area. Alberta, our next door neighbor, they were willing to help. Ontario helped out, but they had a very busy fire season, so we did get some help from Ontario later in the year, as well as Quebec. They had a relatively busy spring, so later in the year we did get some crews from those, and of course from the East Coast, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia, the Northwest Territories, the Yukon Territories. We did bring in 2 incident management teams from Australia. That was an interesting thing to do with COVID and all the restrictions, as well as we brought in fire crews from Mexico. So bringing those crews over with COVID was, you know, bringing them in and isolating them before they could even get on the line. So it was an interesting year to try to bring in outside agencies. We did have, when we went under a state of emergency, the federal government gave us 625 members of the armed forces, which cycled through. The great thing that they did is they came with all their aircraft and were able to help us move resources around pretty efficiently. So that was very helpful, given that we had fires from the 49th parallel to the 60th parallel. If you jumped in a truck at the 49th parallel and wanted to drive to the 60th parallel, it would take you about 28 hours. So the ability to move aircraft or vehicles and crews by aircraft was a great help for us. At the peak of the season, we had about 4,000 people involved in the firefighting effort. That being said, with a lot of agencies not being able to provide it, a lot of those were type 2 and type 3 crews. So, you know, really hampered in terms of where you can put those type of crews and what effectiveness they really truly have on fire. So it was an interesting year from that perspective. And I think we did pretty well considering what happened. Again, for us, we usually have a somewhat busy spring. This year was a rather quiet spring. We can have some large spring fires, but this year was relatively quiet in terms of number of fires and area burnt. Late June, when the heat dome hit, that led into a high amount of fires into that July 1st through 4th period. And of course, that was where we had the bulk of our area burnt as well. 10-year comparison, as you can see, we stick kind of plus or minus that 1,500 wildfires each year. This year, just slightly above that in terms of number of wildfires. Area burnt, you can see the last 5 years, we've had 3 pretty big fire years. 2017 burned about 3 million acres. 2018, about 3.3 million acres. And this year, about 2.14 million acres. So, basically in the last 5 years, with 2 pretty well non-starter fire seasons of 2019 and 2020, we've burned over 8 million acres of land. So, huge part of the forest has been impacted by fire. Lightning stats, so very simply, yeah, as most places in the Pacific Northwest, we seem to get the bulk of our lightning in June and July, starts to peter off into August and almost non-existent in September. But the 184,000 lightning strikes that we had in July basically occurred in a 4-day period near the 1st of July and started a lot of the fires. Just kind of our drought code, and the drought code kind of would be the equivalent to your 1,000-hour fuel. So you can see how April 30th, that central or southern interior area was at a little higher level. Going into May 30th, you can see that yellow and orange regions starting to increase considerably into June 30th, near the end of the heat dome, where basically the whole province was under heat stress and the starting of fires. Just in retrospect of the fire season, and this is kind of my twisted thought about it, interesting that we've seen following the heat dome, we had wildfires in areas that haven't seen large-scale wildfires in their history. The interior rainforest, where we should see fires 50 to 75 acres in size, we were seeing fires that were 10 to 12,000 acres in size. So lots of areas with deep duff layers, heavy fuel loading, and pretty steep terrain. That was pretty interesting. This was kind of the worst case scenario, where we had to really think about the ability to manage wildfires from within. We weren't able to tap in a whole bunch of resources due to COVID, due to other people being very busy. So it was an interesting perspective from that size of incident levels. My incident management team, we were in the interior rainforest for 2 weeks. We had 36 fires, and we had 2 crews, 2 similar hotshot crews. We call them unit crews. So we had 40 firefighters and we had 36 fires with limited aerial resources. So, you'd have to start thinking large scale landscape fire and how to manage across that. Climate change, the heat dome, and speaking to a lot of our weather staff, they're not thinking that we're going to get a heat dome every year, but we're definitely seeing the increases in temperatures and drought conditions. The past winter for us, as a lot of the Pacific Northwest, snowpack in the mountains usually is our big helping factor for the fire season, and we were below average for snowpack in a lot of the areas where wildfires occurred. And that's been kind of the numbers for the last 3 or 4 years are following that. Snowpacks are decreasing considerably. During the heat dome, we did Canadian High temperature record of 49.6 degrees Celsius or 122 degrees Fahrenheit. On that day, we were the hottest place in Canada and the United States. So, you know, when you start looking at the end of June and thinking about Arizona, New Mexico, some of those places, it gets pretty warm there, and we were warmer than those areas. So pretty interesting. We're kind of on the tail end of some pretty big deteriorating fuel conditions. We've had about 50 million acres of mountain pine beetle infestation. So we have a lot of forest that's been affected by insects, disease, and drought as well. So, you know, those are leading to some pretty high fuel load conditions across the province and being very susceptible to wildfire. This year, as every government agency, public expectations, and the social media world really ramped up this year. I think one of the best pictures I've seen from this fire season was a shipping container that had burnt when a community was lost, and it had government arsonists spray painted on the side of it. So it was a pretty interesting year that the vocal minority was really wanting to take pot shots at government and the wildfire association or wildfire service. We have a huge wildland urban interface issue. We have over 7.5 million acres of fuel in and around communities that are at higher risk and needing to be treated. And right now, we have a fuel management program, and we're averaging about 5,000 hectares a year, which equates to about 10,000, 12,000 acres. So doing the math there, we're not making much headway at that. We truly need to revitalize our prescribed burning and our slash management following harvesting. The program kind of went dead in the late 90s, early 90s, and we're just trying to get it ramped back up. And again, the public expectations of us doing that are, I would say it's almost 50-50. People want us to do it, and there's 50% of the people don't want us doing it, you know, for all the reasons that you as a group deal with too. They don't want to see smoke, they don't want the fire getting away and all that. We lost a complete community on the 30th of June, the community of Lytton. Fire went from ignition to being completely through the community in probably about 30 minutes. So I just happened to be arriving in the area, went down. We did have two public deaths there as well, but went down to that area, and it was amazing how fast the fire spread through the community. It was a pretty hot day, 46 degrees Celsius, which would probably equate to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and wind speeds of around 40 miles an hour. So the fire came into the community and ripped through the community pretty quick. Some things that I seen post fire, the fire truck was still in the fire hall. The fire went through the community that fast. I think the biggest thing I seen was somebody had left their motorcycle in the middle of the road and had jumped on a truck. The keys were still in the ignition of the motorcycle, so that's how fast the fire was spreading through the community. It's a small community, population about 400 people, but there was 3 houses that were left after the fire went through the community. So pretty foretelling of what can happen when a fire strikes a community or starts near a community on those conditions. That's it. It's pretty quick, but if there's any questions, I will wait to the question period. Thank you.